Colin Bell.
Bell coming in, a goal by Colin Bell, out of nothing.
Bell! A goal! Colin Bell! And the chance is on for Bell!
Bell, the chip on the approach. He must be there. What a beautiful chip and a beautiful try.
Oh, and this is the chance for Bell! And he's taken it! 20 minutes gone, and it's Colin. What a goal! What a goal!
But how can you compare him with Colin Bell, who was head and shoulders above everyone?
Pleasure to play with the kid. He was brilliant and a lovely fella.
He had the brain of David Silva.
I just watched this lovely bit of skill round Bobby Moore.
But his reputation speaks for himself. He would have gone on to be one of the best ever, without a doubt.
I think he's one in a million.
Brilliant player, brilliant person.
His leg was 2-3 times the size of what it should have been. He'd have beat every record because he was that good. He was unique as a player. He had everything.
A year ago, in January 2021, Manchester City lost its greatest club legend, Colin Bell.
The man known as the King of the Kippax was instrumental in Manchester City's glory years of the late 1960s and early 1970s, and is rightly regarded as one of City's finest ever players.
It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Bell should be spoken about in the same breath as the likes of Steven Gerrard, Kevin De Bruyne and Bobby Charlton. In fact, Sir Bobby described Bell as one of his greatest heroes, and we'll explore why Bell isn't as highly regarded by non-Manchester City fans as he should be. A man described as a reluctant hero, a fantastic footballer, but an even better person. A fabulous career for Manchester City and England.
But one which could have been forever immortalised in the record books, if not for a tragic incident in 1975. Through the lenses of football fans who saw him play in person, those who were inspired by and worked for Colin Bell, the words of Colin Bell himself, and even Man City legend and former teammate of Bell, Tommy Booth. This is the Colin Bell story, the tale of a king. Colin Bell was born on the 26th of February 1946 in Hesleden, a small village in County Durham in the northeast of England. The son of a coal miner, John William Bell, Colin and his older sister, Eileen, were brought up by their father and the woman Colin would go on to call Mum, his Aunt Ella. Colin's biological mother, Elizabeth, sadly died shortly after Colin's first birthday at only the age of 39, 4 months after being diagnosed with bowel cancer. Whilst never a professional footballer, Colin's father was a decent player, and footballing talent and athleticism seemed to run in the family. His mother's first words after giving birth to Colin were, "Dad has got his little footballer after all." It was as if Colin was destined to become a professional footballer. His upbringing wasn't what you describe as typical. Due to the unsociable hours his father was forced to work as a coal miner, Colin and his sister moved to Blackhall Rocks to live with their Aunt Ella. Colin rarely saw his father as a young boy, and there would also be times when he rarely saw his aunt. She worked long hours as a cleaner to support the children, and Colin would usually find himself on the street corner, spending hours playing football on his own. But Colin still had a very happy childhood. His sister, who was 12 years older than him, was extremely protective of Colin and essentially took on the role of mother rather than older sister. His Aunt Ella, who Colin always referred to as Mum, was Colin's real mother as far as he was concerned. And at the age of 7, Colin moved back to live with his father. Whilst their relationship wasn't as close as it could have been due to John's unsociable hours, he was nevertheless an incredibly proud and supportive father. John, who first went down the pits at the age of 12, was adamant that his son would not follow in his footsteps, and he regularly attended Colin's youth matches in secret so Colin wouldn't notice him. As we would discover with Colin, John just wanted to be in the background and never wanted to make a fuss. Colin's Christmas presents as a child were the same each year: a Sunderland shirt, football boots, shin pads, shorts, socks, and a ball. He was obsessed with football and would practice for hours in the backyard after school, honing his skills to the point where he was good enough to play with boys much older than him. At just the age of 11, he was playing for East Durham under-15s, easily outperforming boys 4 years his senior. In sports classes at school, Colin was identified early on as someone with an unnatural degree of talent and ability for his age. His teacher, Brian Jemmett, was so sure he'd become a professional footballer, he made Colin play football as an inside left with a plimsoll or pump on his right foot so he'd be forced to develop his left side. Colin didn't exactly excel at school from an education perspective. he failed his exams to enter AJ Dawson Grammar School because he had no interest in passing. He did take it more seriously at the age of 15, joining Stockton Technical College and even passing his engineering exams, but his focus was entirely on becoming a professional footballer, so much so that he didn't bother to pick up his qualification certificates. It was during this time that Colin's talents were being identified by a number of clubs outside the immediate area. After playing for his school team, East Durham, and his college team, Bell was asked to play for Horden Colliery Welfare Juniors, the best junior team in the region. They would win games very easily, on one occasion by a score of 21-1, and these performances and results didn't go unnoticed by scouts of professional football clubs. Newcastle, Arsenal, Wolves, Hull, Bury and Huddersfield all made inquiries of Bell, with Huddersfield, Bury and Arsenal the clubs Bell had the most discussions with. Bell's trial with Arsenal wasn't successful, but he'd hidden a back injury from his father for fear of missing out on the opportunity, so wasn't able to perform to the level he was capable of. A trip to 2nd Division Huddersfield was next for Colin, but whilst the club were keen on signing him, Colin felt there was something missing. The club didn't have the friendly atmosphere he was after, something very important to him. The same couldn't be said of Bury, another 2nd Division side at the time. After playing in 2 practice matches for the reserve side at Gig Lane, Bell, now 17, had made his decision. Bury were desperate to sign him. To Colin, everyone felt incredibly genuine and interested in him, a vibe he didn't receive whilst trialling at Huddersfield. Despite late attempts from top-flight clubs to sign Bell, including Wolves and Arsenal, Bell had made his decision. As far as he was concerned, the renewed interest from these clubs was simply because other clubs were also interested in him. Bell, being very shy, needed a club where he felt at home. Bury had won his heart, and that was the club for him.
First time I saw Bury was in Christmas Day, 1946. In those days, there were you didn't see these players on television or anything like that. You didn't see young players coming through then. All you did, but you saw them in newspapers or whatever. But I always remember I used to go down regular. But at that time, 63, when he signed for Bury. I mean, I was only young, but he seemed, and he was only 17. I was like in my 20s then, and it was unusual seeing someone younger than me playing for Bury. Such a good player. He was spotted when he was playing for the reserves. Oh, you could tell he was something special, yeah, definitely.
Bell officially signed his first professional contract with Bury on the 16th of July 1963 at the age of 17. The contract was worth £12 a week. Bell initially turned out for the reserve side, but he wouldn't have to wait long before being given his chance in the first team. In February 1964, ironically enough against Manchester City at Main Road, Colin Bell made his senior debut, scoring the first goal of his career in English football in a 1-1 draw. He was through on goal after staying onside, rounded the keeper and slotted the ball in the net from the tight angle. Colin had officially announced himself on the footballing stage in style.
During his earliest years at Bury, Bell was put up in a house here on Park Hills Road, just a 10-minute walk away from Gig Lane. Bell often felt homesick, but he never told his family so he could focus on his football. And it helped that Bury was a very friendly club. It allowed Bell to settle in almost immediately as he became a mainstay for Bury during the 3 seasons he was at the club.
From 1963 to 1965, Bell made 82 league appearances for Bury, scoring 25 goals. He would also encounter some of his future Manchester City teammates whilst playing in the 2nd Division, facing Francis Lee, Mike Summerby, Tony Buck, and even his future coach, Malcolm Allison. At the age of only 19, Bell was made club captain, becoming the youngest captain in the Football League. Bell described himself as a bit of a loner, someone who'd always been quiet off the pitch. But that didn't mean Bell wasn't confident, far from it. He was by no means arrogant, but he was well aware of his abilities, and believed the best way to captain a side was to lead by example.
Once he got in the first team and he started playing so well and he was scoring himself, there were a lot of people went back to Gig Lane who hadn't been for a while, but it seemed so strange that he was so much younger than me and he was made captain. He was only 18 and 19 when he was made captain. Absolutely amazing, really. All the other players in the Bury side, there were a few young ones, but you never saw anybody so young, really.
One of Bell's Bury teammates and close friends, John Bain, said the following of Colin. He looked too skinny to be a footballer. He was fast though, and boy could he run. He had a great sense of humour. He's dry and sarcastic, and you have to be on your guard against him. He wouldn't speak his mind out loud very often, but to his close friends, he always spoke his mind. He's got a wicked sense of humour and, of course, he was a great footballer. Being made club captain at such a young age attracted the interest of bigger clubs, even more so when Bell was practically man of the match each time he turned out for Bury. The most interest came from 1st Division Blackpool and 2nd Division Manchester City. Blackpool were mid-table, whilst Manchester City were favourites for promotion. Bell had no overriding desire to leave Bury, but he did have ambitions to play at the highest level. Bury, whilst described by Bell as a perfect apprenticeship, wasn't a big club and wasn't strong financially. Whilst Bell was Bury's best player and captain, the club was short of cash and needed to sell.
When he was transferred, nobody knew about it, but the club owed a lot of money to the bank, and they had to pay their overdraft off, so they had to sell a player. And they never told the fans. They sold Colin Bell for next to nothing really, 45,000.
The club finished in 18th, 16th and 19th during Bell's spell at Bury, towards the bottom of the 22-team table, with Bell scoring around a goal every 3 matches.
Partway through the 1965-66 season, legendary Manchester City coach Malcolm Allison went to watch 3 of Colin Bell's games here at Gig Lane. He was impressed by what he saw and inquired about a potential transfer for Colin Bell. The response he got? £45,000, a lot of money in the 1960s. The British record transfer fee in 1966 was Dennis Law's move to Manchester United 4 years prior for a sum of £115,000, and Colin Bell, as a teenager, would be setting a record if he went to City for £45,000. It was also an amount Manchester City didn't have immediately available, and legendary Manchester City manager Joe Mercer wasn't entirely convinced of the prospect of signing Bell.
But City and Malcolm Allison weren't deterred. Allison stalled for time while City gathered the necessary funds. He attended more of Bell's matches, making sure to tell every scout in earshot that Bell was hopeless in the air and entirely one-footed. Allison's attempts to mislead rival scouts succeeded, and a few weeks later, in the spring of 1966, Bell was signed by Manchester City in a £45,000 transfer.
It was a lot of money, it seemed a lot of money, but I mean, everybody acknowledged since then that it was a snip, really. There was a lot of people, I stopped going for a few games, but there was some never went for a few years because of that, you know. And whilst he was here, it was amazing, really, and there were scouts here all the time. To sum it up, he was the best player that I've ever seen at Bury, really, and he was only there a short time.
I signed Colin Bell from Bury, and Malcolm Allison had gone to see him play. And I said, well, I must go and have a look at this Colin Bell. I went to see him play. They played Bolton. And he had the worst game you ever seen in your life. And I said to Malcolm, hey, what's this? He said, he can't play, this fella. Anyway, Malcolm's a good talker. So I sided against my better judgment. But what a player he turned out to be, didn't he?
The move to City came out of the blue for Colin. He was informed of both City's and Blackpool's interest by then Bury manager Bert Head in Bert's car, surrounded by fish and chips wrappings. Bell ultimately picked City as he felt they were the more ambitious club on the rise, despite playing in the division below Blackpool. Bell ended his Bury career on £25 a week and would earn £35 a week at City, which in the modern day translates to an annual salary of around £30,000 when accounting just for general inflation. He was offered a 3-year contract, longer than usual in the 1960s, and a testament to the confidence City had that Bell would become a star player for the club. He immediately settled in at City, thanks to the welcoming and bubbly atmosphere at the club. In his first season with the club, the final stretch of the 65-66 season, Bell played every league game for City, winning the 2nd Division and scoring 4 goals in 11 games. Just like at Bury, Bell scored a goal on his City debut against Derby.
My earliest recollections of Colin was his debut at the baseball ground in Derby. And the baseball ground is notorious for one of the worst playing surfaces ever. And the great memory, we won 2-1, and Colin made his debut and scored his first goal. It wasn't the classic goals that he scored in his career. Alan Oakes, our left half at the time, powered a shot towards goal, and Colin was in the penalty area, it hit his backside and went into the goal.
Bell was actually deployed as a striker in his first few games for City, such was his proficiency in front of goal, but it was Malcolm Allison who had the idea of playing Bell in midfield as a box-to-box player. Colin Bell wore the number 8 shirt, and he had all of the attributes to truly excel as the classic number 8. Perhaps his most infamous trait was his athleticism, pace and fitness. Mike Summerby noted that He was fantastically fit, a big step above us, and we were a very fit side ourselves. For the making of this documentary, I was fortunate enough to speak to Manchester City legend Tommy Booth, who played alongside Colin Bell 290 times at City, the 5th most of any player.
When we first got Colin, he was from Bury. I mean, we used to be good trainers. We'd train Monday, Tuesday. If we had a game midweek Wednesday, we'd have the day off Thursday. But every day we used to train hard, really hard. And when Colin joined us, it was just incredible. I mean, he was. I mean, we thought we were going to be a lot more fitter than him, like, because he's not used to our sort of like training sessions, and he was just unbelievable. I mean, we'd go on a 4 or 5 mile run, then we'd do 220s, 440s, and it was all Derek Ibbotson who used to take us, train, coach, like, and he came with us for the first time, Colin, and I tell you what, he did it with a breeze, honestly.
There was a genuine feeling of camaraderie and togetherness for Bell at City. They were just like a family. Bell had achieved his childhood dream. He was not only a professional footballer, but one that would be playing in the top flight of English football in the upcoming season. That summer, in 1966, England won the World Cup, and Bell dreamt of playing with the likes of Bobby Moore, Gordon Banks, Geoff Hurst and Bobby Charlton. That dream would become a reality much sooner than Bell could ever have hoped for, as he set his sights on the First Division and the prospect of playing for England.
Here, where Main Road once stood, is where Bell would ultimately write his name into football history. In City's return season to the top flight, the 1966-67 season, Bell would play in all 42 of City's league games, scoring 12 goals in the league and finishing the season as City's top goal scorer in all competitions. Under the stewardship of Joe Mercer and Malcolm Allison, newly promoted City consolidated, reaching the quarter-finals of the FA Cup and ending the season in 15th place, whilst Blackpool were relegated. Bell had clearly made the correct decision. City was starting to acquire an ambitious standing.
And this is where Bell really started to develop his reputation as an excellent world-class player. Bell was much more than just an athlete, but it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say his stamina, pace and athleticism were Herculean.
Magnificent stamina where he could play from box to box. That's why he got the name Nijinsky after the famous racehorse.
Here comes Nijinsky and Leicester bigger towards the stand side with Hogarth making ground over on the far side now. They're coming into the final furlong and it's Nijinsky striding away from him. Nijinsky going away, being chased by Blakeney now. It's the two Derby winners who look like being first and second. Leicester Biggett looks over his shoulder. Blakeney's making ground on him, but Leicester's just letting him canter. What a horse this is. He's trotted up. Nijinsky's the winner.
Nijinsky is regarded by horse racing experts as the greatest European racehorse of the 20th century. His speed and stamina were unrivaled, so naturally, Malcolm Allison nicknamed Colin Bell after him. And Bell did his nickname justice. It was evident that, had Colin not become a professional footballer, he would have quite easily excelled as a middle or long distance runner. 5,000 metre runner and Olympic medalist of 1956, Derek Ibbotson, told Malcolm Allison that Bell could have been a world champion and Olympic winner. Whilst other players were vomiting from the intense training regime, Bell was thriving.
I mean, I honestly thought there was something radically wrong with him, you know, because we were breathing through our backsides, but he wasn't. He'd be talking to you as he's running, and he was just saying, "Are you all right, Tommy?" And he used to say, "Sod off, God," like. And he was just an outstanding athlete. And even the Derek Ibbotson said if he didn't play football, he could have put his mind and been sort of like anything over 220, 440, 880, the mile, you know. He said he'd have trouble which one he could do best because he was so good.
There was certainly something slightly abnormal about Colin's body, which granted him this obscene stamina. Colin himself revealed that his resting heart rate was in the low 40s, with a normal resting heart rate being anywhere from 60 to 100 beats a minute. And this, coupled with his work rate, endeavour and drive, made him the perfect box-to-box player. But he was so much more than just Nijinsky. He may as well have been nicknamed after the famous ballet dancer Nijinsky, because his poise, technical ability, agility and balance were frightening. He was the complete midfielder. And Bell would be pivotal for City going into the 67-68 season. But even with the likes of Bell, Summerby and Neil Young, City failed to keep pace with United, Liverpool and Leeds. After 11 games, City found themselves 10th in the table. Something was missing from this side. a truly clinical striker. The new signing of legendary striker Francis Lee for a club record fee of £60,000 created City's holy trinity, the triumvirate of Bell, Lee and Summerby. This was the final piece of the puzzle, and a City side which had been struggling at the start of the season went on a run of 11 matches unbeaten. One of those matches was the infamous Ballet on Ice on the 9th of December 1967. Going into the game, City had climbed from 10th to 2nd in the table, only behind defending champions Manchester United by 2 points. These were the days when a win was worth just 2 points, and after United drew 2-2 with Newcastle, the victory put City just 1 point behind the league leaders. The Ballet on Ice is infamous in that the conditions at Main Road that day were abhorrent. The winter of 1967 had left most parts of England in a sheet of snow, and Manchester was no exception. In conditions which never would have been allowed for today, Manchester City and Colin Bell played one of the best games of their lives against a Spurs side which contained Jimmy Greaves, the record goal scorer in English top-flight history. Greaves would actually score the first goal of the game, but thanks to Bell's equaliser, City comfortably took control of the match and ran out 4-1 winners.
Summerby, Lee, Valerie, Bell, White. Colin Bell, the scorer.
The team that day was, according to the commentator, the most exciting in England, and City's players were described by Spurs as Olympic speed skaters. Such was their ability to glide around the pitch in style, whilst the Spurs players struggled to stay upright. The match would ultimately win Match of the Season and foreshadow the potential and beauty of this City side. City could now dream of winning their first top-flight title since 1937, and Colin Bell was at the heart of everything good that City did that season. So much so that the fans started to call Colin the King. He was dubbed the King of the Kippax being City's most famous and vocal terrace stand at Main Road.
His other nickname, as you probably all know, is Ding Dong, which is obviously Ding Dong Bell, which the fans have adopted quite naturally.
After 28 games, the title race was still being heavily contested by 4 teams: United, Leeds, City and Liverpool. City once again found themselves trailing United, despite having the best offensive record and the best goal difference in the league. The Manchester derby at Old Trafford on the 27th of March 1968 would prove to be pivotal in City's quest for the title. Bell had experienced 3 Manchester derbies before this one, all ending in defeat. This was a United side which contained the United holy trinity of Best, Law and Charlton, a team that would go on to win the European Cup that season. United were 4 points ahead of City. Anything but a win for City would be detrimental to City and Bell's title aspirations. And after George Best gave the English champions an early lead, it appeared another loss was on the cards. But Bell was the difference maker, and he ran the show. He scored an equaliser before half-time and won the penalty which took the game away from United. City had beaten United 3-1 at Old Trafford, and they closed the gap on United to just 2 points. With only 3 games left to play, United had 54 points, Leeds 53, City 52 and Liverpool 49. Realistically, any of those sides could still be crowned as league champions, and City knew they would probably have to win each of their final 3 games to have a chance of dethroning United. A hard-fought 2-0 win against Everton left City at the top of the table with 2 games to go. United had lost at West Brom and Leeds had lost at Stoke. City were now on the same points as United, but their superior goal average placed them above United. City then won away against Spurs, with Bell scoring 2 goals, including the winner. But United also won, meaning the title would be decided on the final day of the season. City were away at Newcastle, whilst United faced Sunderland, the team Bell supported as a boy. The title decider against Newcastle would prove to be one of the most exciting and nerve-wracking games for City fans. Newcastle at St James's Park at that period was one of City's bogey teams. They rarely walked away with even a point, never mind a win. United, on the other hand, were at home to a team near the bottom of the table. The bookies made United favourites to retain the title.
And there goes the whistle. Newcastle United versus Manchester City, and at stake for the League Championship, the biggest prize in English football. Doyle to Bell in the Newcastle penalty area now, to Doyle, and there it is, there's the first goal. Mike Summerby has scored. Now Sinclair. in position, and here comes Brian Robson. It's a goal! Dangerous player. There's Colin Bell to Oakes. Trying a shot through, and there it is! There's the second one! There's the second one!
At half-time, the score was 2-2. Unaware of the scoreline at Old Trafford, City had to win to secure the title. In the second half, Bell was instrumental in scoring City's third goal. His wonderful turn and cut-in left one defender for dead, then another, and his follow-up shot was too much for the keeper to handle, as he could only palm it out to the on-rushing Neil Young. But City would need another goal to secure the win, and Bell brilliantly assisted Lee to make it 4-2, with a touch and through ball David Silva would have been proud of.
Bell, what can he do? There's Lee! There's Lee! He's not offside! He's not offside! Lee has scored!
That would prove to be the winning goal, with Newcastle scoring a third late on to create a nerve-wracking finish to the game for City. But that was how City played, on the front foot, with a full committal to creativity and offensive play. The game ended 4-3, and City had won the title for the first time since the 1930s.
Sure, they can hardly stand the tension. I know I can't. And there it is! Manchester City are the champions!
I was at the Newcastle game when we won 4-3 to win the league championship, and it was a fantastic day, one of the best games ever.
And what made it even sweeter for Bell was that his childhood team, Sunderland, had actually beaten United at Old Trafford. Fans ran onto the pitch to celebrate with their heroes, and City and Bell were champions of England, beating bitter local rivals Manchester United to the top spot on the final day of the season. Bell and the rest of the City lads hit the town as soon as they returned to Manchester. A team celebration and a few drinks to unwind after the best day in Bell's career so far.
People said he never drank, Colin, but he did. He liked the glass of wine, and but he wasn't sort of a beer drinker. He just had like a couple of glasses.
Somerby, Bell, Lee, Young, and Coleman, they blended in. They become one of the best. I think they were the best club side I've seen for years.
There was no one player alone that won City the title that year. It was a collective effort from a wonderful group of players. Neil Young, Mike Doyle, Alan Oakes, Lee and Somerby to name a few, but Bell was certainly one of its star performers, if not the star performer that season. With 14 league goals in 35 games, Bell was tied as City's third highest goal scorer that season. And it's important to remember that Bell was a midfielder, not a forward player. His position was technically an inside forward, but the positional terminology for inside forward has changed drastically over the decades, and it's simplest to describe Bell as a midfielder. In addition to the league title win, 1968 also saw Bell receive his first ever full international call-up for the England squad. He won his first cap in a friendly against Sweden, which England won 3-1. Bell had done it. His childhood dream was realised. He was a professional footballer, an English champion, a full England international, and would be competing in next season's European Cup. But these realised ambitions carried the weight of fame. Some people relish that, others don't. Of City's Holy Trinity, Lee and Somerby were more than happy to receive the plaudits and indulge in the adulation they received. But Bell much preferred to stay out of the limelight.
Oh, well, it's easy playing with Francis as far as I'm concerned. You just give him the ball and let him do the rest.
He struggled with the idea of being recognised in public and would go so far as to deny that he was Colin Bell when he was recognised. "You've mistaken me for someone else. I'm not Colin Bell," is what he'd say far too regularly for Bell's liking. But of course, he just won the league title and was an England international. He was in the public eye, whether he liked it or not. Not only was Bell under greater scrutiny, so was the entire Manchester City team. After a convincing 6-1 win in the Charity Shield, City found that other teams in the 68-69 season raised their game to another level when coming up against them. City were the champions after all, and Bell noted that every game felt like a cup tie. Such was the desire of the opposition teams to defeat the best team in the country.
Oh yeah, it's a good shot! That's the goal, Colin Bell!
And because of this, in the league, City struggled. Bell was still able to score 14 goals in the league, the same as last year and only second to Francis Lee.
Fine tackle there by Colin Bell, who turns the call. Bell being fleeced all the time by Fitzpatrick. Held he was, no doubt about it, he was held, and the referee hasn't given it.
But City's attempt to defend their title was in tatters. City ended the season in 13th place, only 2 points off United, but 27 points off eventual winners Leeds. Bell was able to keep his goal-scoring figures the same as the title-winning season, but the rest of the team couldn't keep up. City scored 22 league goals less in the 68-69 season, and their first ever foray into European competition was just as poor. City drew Fenerbahce in the first round of the European Cup, the competition now known as the Champions League. Malcolm Allison had famously declared City would terrify Europe to death, but City were not able to cope with the tactics deployed by the Turkish side. These were the days when much less was known about foreign opposition, and City had no experience of playing teams from overseas. Indeed, no English team had faced a Turkish side before City. So City were incredibly shocked when Fenerbahce came to Main Road to play rugby. Bell was quoted as saying they kicked lumps out of them in the home leg, which ended 0-0, and the return leg in Turkey was even worse. They kicked City off the park, winning 2-1 and ending City's brief stint in the European Cup. Bell described the atmosphere as incredibly frightening and inhospitable. There were fires in the stands, fans would spit and throw projectiles onto the pitch, and armed police guarded the tunnel. But City weren't out of Europe for long. The European Cup dream was over and the league was already gone, but the FA Cup was another matter. After beating a very good Newcastle and Spurs side, City found themselves up against Everton, who'd finished third in the league that year. The winner was scored in dramatic fashion by Tommy Booth in the last minute of the game, and City were through to the final.
But the miracle was short-lived. From the corner, the ball came out of a ruck to Booth, who thumped it home. What a great day it was for the young centre-half.
Although it was Booth's breakthrough season into the first team at 19 years of age, Bell demanded excellence from all of his teammates, no matter their age or experience, and Booth was no different even after scoring that pivotal goal.
The thing you didn't want to do was make a mistake, because Colin used to just say, look at you, and say a few words. To have that look at you, and you just thought, I'll make sure I'll never do that again, because he just had this thing about him, and he had this aura about him.
City faced Leicester in the final, a Leicester side which contained a very young Peter Shilton.
All five forwards up, and in comes Bell! And that header was going like a bullet. What a goalkeeper Peter Shilton is. And what a header by Bell.
City won the final 1-0 thanks to a goal from Neil Young.
It's Willett with him. Summerby back to Young. It's the beautiful goal! Scored by Young, made by Summerby. Well done, Tony Brook.
City's golden era continued, with the 23-year-old Bell and City winning 3 major trophies in 4 seasons, just 3 years after the club were in the second division. And with the FA Cup win came another chance for European glory. The European Cup Winners' Cup, whilst no longer in existence, was regarded by UEFA as the second most prestigious European competition, behind the European Cup and ahead of the UEFA Cup, or Europa League. One could only qualify for the competition by winning the FA Cup or overseas equivalents. City's league performances, whilst an improvement on last year, were still a far cry from the title-winning season. City finished 10th in the league, with Bell still scoring an impressive 11 league goals from midfield in just 31 games.
And to get Geoff Hurst to give his opinion of them in the context of the World Cup. With Geoff Hurst is Jimmy Hill.
I spoke after the game yesterday. They're both obviously very happy at that wonderful result that they got in London. And I spoke to Francis Lee about Colin Bell's performance, what he thought of him as a player, what he was like to play with, what is the real Colin Bell.
Well, he's got a lot of ability, and he makes such long runs from behind. And he's always up there with you, and he's always back in defence. With me being the most forward player, he always gets up alongside me. And he always seems to be back in the defence as well, so it's not a bad fault.
Jeff, Colin Bell is the leading scorer at the moment in the First Division, 18 goals. He gets the same rate of scoring as a Greaves or yourself or anybody like that. But he has a different game. He gets back and defends. Would this help you? Would this be a better game for you to play, or is he just 1 in a million or something?
I think he's 1 in a million to an extent.
Yeah, but one man can't be that much supreme or more supreme than anybody else in terms of stamina.
Well, he does seem to be to me. I mean, if you analyse him, you see he's up 1 minute with Francis Lee back helping the defence, and he can make these long runs, 60 or 70 yards, and doesn't seem to bother him.
And again, Harry Redknapp puts this crossover. Who is it? But again, Colin Bell on a very accurate header out. Look at the way he's sprinting off there, ready to attack. He's good in the middle of the field, and he's able to resist challenges. He's pretty strong, like that kind of thing there. And he's also, at moments of crisis, there's Harry Redknapp. He's away. He's 6 yards from his own goal line. Who is that stopping him? Giving away a corner, but preventing a cross, but Colin Bell. But what I like is the way he accelerates here. Look at him running up there from defence, getting a bit muddled up with it, but just watch his skill from now on. A ball out to the right wing, just a moment's hesitation while he supports the fullback there. Now just watch this lovely bit of skill round Bobby Moore, delicate ball laid off, and that beautiful shot there which scrapes past the far post. That is a very unusual footballer.
I think he's unusual in as much as he's got this long player, marvellous.
He's also got a bit of skill to go on the end.
Oh, he's got as much, if not more skill than everybody else as well. But he's different in the fact that he can run all day, he seems to.
The 1969-70 season would, however, prove to be a great season for City and Bell in the cup competitions. In the League Cup, City saw off Southport, Everton and QPR before facing United in the semi-finals. Bell, who'd already scored 4 goals in the competition and had scored 2 goals against United earlier in the season in a 4-0 thumping, scored the first against United at Main Road, which City won 2-1.
Red shirts are bobbing around there. Bell! A goal! Colin Bell! 13 minutes! And when a loose ball falls at the feet of Bell, that's it! They really are carrying the fight to City, but it's City now with Oakes. Young. And Oakes again. Bell has gone on ahead. Here's Bell. Bowyer in the middle, looking for a little one. Bowyer! And almost there! Now beginning to take up their positions along the touchline as we come towards the end of the first half, with City still leading by this 1 goal scored by Bell, who's on the ball at the moment. Still Colin Bell.
City ultimately won the tie 4-3 on aggregate and found themselves in yet another final. In Europe, City beat Athletic Bilbao 6-3, Belgium side Liège 8-0, Portuguese side Académica 1-0 and Schalke 5-2, before reaching their first ever European final. Bell had scored 5 goals in 8 of those games, including the crucial semi-final against Schalke, where City had to overturn a 1-0 deficit after the first leg.
Pardo to Young. Bell! And the flick was just enough, the goalkeeper flat-footed.
In the League Cup final, City faced West Brom.
And here's another high one to look for Astle, going in, and it's there! Summerby to flick it on in spite of the pain. And it's there! The equaliser for Manchester City. Oh, and Lee did well to get that over. Bell flicking it on, Pardo!
After extra time, City won the final 2-1, and Bell had completed his collection of English trophies. A month later, on the 29th of April 1970, City beat Gornik Zaps 2-1 in the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup to win City's first and currently only European trophy.
Tee himself up. Good save by Koska. Young! The rain absolutely teeming down. Was a bit lucky, the power took it through the legs. But it's a free kick that's never going to be taken. The Cup Winners' Cup has gone to Main Road. And the old man being lifted up again. It's becoming something of a habit. And that's what it's all about. The European Cup Winners' Cup, which will now join the League Cup on the shelf at Main Road.
It was an historic cup double, and Bell's excellent performances that season would be rewarded in the greatest way possible. He would be invited to England's playing squad for the 1970 World Cup.
There is a school of thought that says he doesn't play as well for England or do this for England right through a match as he does for Manchester City. Would you agree with that on what you've seen from yesterday and playing with him for England?
I think initially this was true, up until about 2 or 3 games ago for England. But this is very, very hard when a new player comes into the side. You feel a bit nervous. I had this same thing happen to me playing for England early on the first 4 or 5 games. But he's overcome this now, and we'll be seeing performances for England as he does for Manchester City.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful news for us for Wednesday night and, of course, for Mexico.
The World Cup in Mexico was a very unusual one for England. Bobby Moore was falsely arrested. Brazilian fans made as much noise as possible outside of England's hotel rooms to prevent them from sleeping, and legendary goalkeeper Gordon Banks suffered from a suspicious case of food poisoning, which prevented him from playing in England's quarter-final game against West Germany. Alf Ramsey's England were defending champions in 1970 and were the favourites for the whole competition. Bell struggled to dislodge the members of the side that won the World Cup 4 years prior.
Malcolm Allison never disguised the fact that he thought that Alan Mullery was not the player for England. He was always full of criticism of Alan Mullery's play. And indeed, in this morning's papers, Malcolm Allison is quoted again as saying, Mullery is a good, strong, slow player. But how can you compare him with Colin Bell, who was head and shoulders above everyone?
Coming up to when they in the World Cup, after he went to City and everything, and they're pressing Alf Ramsey to include him because he kept picking all the same old players. When they went to Mexico, we sent a fax to Mexico where they were staying at the Guadalajara Hilton, I think it was, wishing them good luck. This was during the World Cup in 1970.
He came on as a substitute against Pele's Brazil, who'd go on to win the whole competition, and started in England's 1-0 win over Czechoslovakia, winning the penalty that would decide the game. But England would go out in the quarter-finals to West Germany. Despite leading 2-0, the game went away from England before Bell was brought on as a substitute. Bobby Charlton, now 34, was absolutely drained and wasn't able to provide the required legs in midfield. The substitution was made too late, and by the time Bell was brought on for Charlton, Beckenbauer had scored to make the game 2-1. The game ended 3-2 to West Germany, and the media in England tried to scapegoat Bell's substitution as the reason for the defeat, not appreciating that West Germany had scored before Bell was brought on, and that the game had escaped England long before Bell was introduced. Moreover, Bell's performance for England was exceptional. He could have had 2 assists, and he certainly should have won a penalty late on in the game.
The shot now, and he was nearly there on the near post. Great try by Colin Bell on as the substitute. A very weak shot from Beckenbauer, number 19, Colin Bell. Bell, the chip on the near post. He must be there! Missed it by about 3 inches. What a beautiful chip and a beautiful try. Final of 1966. And if history is to repeat itself, England is due for 2 goals. There's Colin Bell. There's that! Well, that was a chance. There's Bell. Oh, a hard low one, which Coach Stillinger in trouble. Still Bell again. Again the low one. The bone! Well, that was the one chance, perhaps, that should not have fallen to pour one into the box. It's Colin Bell! Colin Bell, a penalty! Surely! He wouldn't get it. Beckenbauer, every England supporter in his whole stand stood there and yelled penalty.
This would prove to be Bell's first and final involvement in a major international tournament. Despite the disappointment of the World Cup, Bell had found love off the pitch in the spring of 1970, meeting his future wife Marie, who he fell in love with at first sight. They were introduced by Bell's City teammate Tony Buck, and whilst she knew nothing of football, nor particularly cared that Bell was a footballer, that fact just made her even more attractive to Colin. Bell actually missed his first ever date with Marie. In the 1970-71 season at Old Trafford, one of Bell's closest friends, Glyn Pardoe, suffered a broken leg after a challenge by George Best. City beat United 4-1, with a derby win being a regular occurrence during that time period.
There's Colin running out for it now.
He turns on this exceptionally quickly. Perfect cross this is.
Look at the way he came up in the air there as he
As Mike Gore going in, rises very, very high and heads it in off the far post.
How is Glyn Pardoe?
Well, Jim, he has a double fracture, and they were rather worried last night about him because the circulation wasn't too good to his foot.
This is in slow motion. There is Best chasing after the ball. He's miscontrolled it, and you can see, I think, that Pardoe comes in and is there first. But Best goes in only fractionally late up on that tackle, but nevertheless he was second in to Pardoe, and you can see that awful moment there in slow motion as Pardoe falls on the ground injured.
And Bell accompanied Glyn to the hospital, missing his date with Marie. Fortunately, that unusual start to their relationship didn't detriment anything, and the two began courting one another that year. It was a disappointing season for City, being knocked out by Chelsea in the semi-finals of the European Cup Winners' Cup, Bell being injured for that fixture, finishing 11th in the league and seeing internal politics at the club nearly result in the removal of the brilliant managerial pair of Mercer and Allison.
I've always got on very well with Malcolm, always. And he was a character, but very keen on football, very keen, fanatically keen.
Right in there, push him right in, push up against them.
Off the pitch, it was one of the happiest times for Bell. His relationship with Marie was blossoming into something beautiful, and on the 20th of October 1971, Colin proposed to Marie. Bell also began a business venture at that time, opening a restaurant with his former Bury teammate Colin Waldron. They called it the Bell Waldron.
Well, the first time I ever met Colin Bell was when I went to work for him at his restaurant. The first time was when I went for my interview for the job. I knew it was Colin Bell and I knew he was a footballer, but there was no sort of wonder or anything about him being there, you know. Because before that, I wasn't very interested in football. So Colin Bell and Fanny Lee and all them didn't really mean a lot to me. So I went to work at his restaurant in the cocktail bar.
He had the place in Bury. In Prestwich, sorry, and I was in Prestwich. I lived in Prestwich, and he used to go there a few times, like, you know. And he'd always, you know, he'd always say, No, it's on the house. Says no, Colin, because otherwise, if you do that, I'll come here every day. and he'd just start laughing like.
All the players used to come in, and like I said, they didn't mean anything to me at that time. I knew that he was a footballer, and I knew he played for England. The time I was there was really, really good, and I must say he's a perfect gentleman. What a nice person he was. Not only to work for, but to speak to as well. Really nice person. Really enjoyed it. I wish I'd stayed longer, really.
But he'd come over and sit down and have a chat and that. But yeah, it was great, and he loved it. He loved the part of it. It was, I mean, because he was football daft as well. You know, I mean, we all were in them days. You know, with the likes of Malcolm and Joe Mercer who were running us, and it was just a good get out. Sometimes there's a few of us used to go and have a few drinks. Yeah, City lads went a few times. Like, I mean, we had a few dinners there, you know, over the Christmas period or thingy that. But yeah, and we all got on together. Yeah, it was good.
Didn't know whether he'd be there or not because from all the reports, Colin Weldon was doing a lot of the grafting, and he was a bit of a shy character, was Colin Bell. He came over to our table asking her how we enjoyed the meal and one thing and another. So I got chatting, just a short reminiscing with him about when he was at Bury and everything. It was nice to meet him actually, you know, and he was so friendly like, you know, yeah.
Sometimes if we were a bit late when I finished work, he used to take me home in his car, and I used to feel right posh going down in his posh car, and all the curtains would be twitching, people looking. But I do remember there was like a little alleyway at the back of his restaurant, and he used to play kickabout with the local kids there, which I thought was really nice. I mean, can you imagine he'd go home and say, oh, I've been playing football with Colin Bell?
Yeah, it was very nice. I never said anything back. I told him I'd enjoyed the meal.
The 1971-72 season would prove to be a much more successful campaign for City in the league than the seasons following the title win. That season would also see a managerial structure change, with Malcolm Allison becoming manager and Joe Mercer being general manager. Bell, as he had done in every top-flight season with City up to that point, scored double-digit league goals. To put in perspective just how good Bell was, Sir Matt Busby made an inquiry as to whether Bell wanted to join United, and there was even talk that Real Madrid wanted to sign Bell.
Somerby for Bell, and a great goal by Bell!
But Bell was committed and entirely happy at City. He was in a fantastic team, playing his style of football with a group of brilliant people and supported by fans he loved. There was no reason for him to even consider leaving City. Despite his introverted nature, around this time, Bell took part in a number of PR opportunities. He appeared in an advert for Kellogg's Frosties, sung in England's official 1970 World Cup song, which went to #1 in the charts, and also featured in a Manchester City song. On the pitch, the season was going brilliantly well. There was no cup success, but City beat United at Old Trafford once again, this time 3-1.
Lee! Beautiful ball for Bell! Here it is!
Topped the table with just 7 games to go, and were 4 points clear in mid-March 1972. The title race was contested by Derby, Leeds, Liverpool and City. City completed the club record signing of striker Rodney Marsh with 9 games left in the season. Marsh was a fantastic player to watch, very entertaining, but as far as Bell was concerned, he wasn't a City player. Marsh was a maverick, an entertainer. City were a brilliantly drilled and organised side which relied on quick, decisive 1 and 2 touch passing play. It was quick, devastating football and required extreme tactical discipline, something Marsh just didn't have. He would always take far too many unnecessary touches, which totally killed City's attacking play and left Bell frustrated. Not that Bell wasn't a stranger to on-pitch frustration. Mike Somerby described Bell on the pitch as a bit of a yapper, having a go at people, especially referees. He would hound the referee every time a decision he felt should have gone City's way didn't. Such was his desire to win. Despite all that, he wasn't the type of player to show disrespect to the referee, nor use vulgar language to anyone on the pitch, or indeed to anyone in general.
He never swore. He never once swore. No one heard him swear, and it was just a thing. And when we talked to him about it, he just says, well, I think it's it's just me, Tommy. He said, I've never sworn in my life like, and I do it now. We're playing Newcastle one day up there, and he always used to say frigging, Colin, right? So the referee booked him for saying something, and we all said, excuse me, ref, what are you booking him for? And he says, he's not saying that language to me. And we went, oh no, listen, he doesn't swear. He doesn't swear. And the referee looked at me and said, if you don't go away, I'll book you as well. Because he must have thought, he doesn't swear, but no one knew he didn't. And he used to say frigging. Well, obviously, the referee must have thought he said, and we tried to tell him on the picture. And afterwards, he thought, that referee must have thought we were mad. You know, he doesn't swear like. But he got booked for that, for swearing. And he did. None of the lads ever heard him swear. It was unbelievable.
Bell's refusal to swear wasn't down to anything other than he simply didn't feel that swearing was necessary. Whilst Bell didn't verbally curse, he certainly cursed the signing of Rodney Marsh. Marsh had an ego and wasn't short on confidence. The City players used to play head tennis as part of their training, and one day, Bell became sick and tired of Marsh's claims he was unbeatable. Bell challenged him, beat him without dropping a single point, shook his hand, and went home. That was how Bell did his business. That was how Bell expressed his feelings. Bell had shown to Marsh that he was getting too big for his boots. But it wasn't enough. The league leaders, who were 4 points clear at the top of the table, who were playing brilliant, free-flowing football before Marsh joined the club, were only able to win 3 of their final 8 league games. Marsh played in 7 of those games and cost City the title. City ended the season in 4th place, but only 1 point behind winners Derby. Bell later wrote in his autobiography that he believed Marsh cost City the title, and in Marsh's autobiography, he agreed with his critics. I have to hold my hands up. I cost Manchester City the 1972 League Championship. And it would get worse for City. Internal politics in the club had reached a head, and in the summer of 1972, the brilliant partnership of Mercer and Allison ended, with Mercer joining Coventry City and Allison taking control of the managerial responsibilities of the club. In their partnership, Mercer was the manager, Allison was the coach. Their personalities and strengths complemented each other perfectly.
Well, much better after that, but mind you, it was against run of play, I thought. They had a couple of chances, could have gone in, but Summer was playing magnificent, and I think he made the goal.
As brilliant a coach as Allison was, the best according to Bell, he wasn't cut out to be a manager, and he struggled to achieve anything as sole City manager.
Malcolm needed me. I needed Malcolm, no doubt about that, but he needed me, probably more than I needed him. And the combination was right. But on his own, no. Too adventurous. But Malcolm, in those days, wanted to have a place in the sun himself. You know, he wanted a little bit of the glory. And I was getting, I was a manager, you know, and I was getting the glory. But the combination was right. You know, with my experience and his adventure, because I was probably a little quieter and less adventurous than Malcolm, but the combination was right. That's what worked.
But whilst one partnership and era ended at City, another was created when Colin married Marie, the proudest day and best decision of his life, according to Bell. Another proud moment that same summer came in an international game against Northern Ireland, when Alf Ramsey asked Bell if he'd captain the side in the absence of Bobby Moore. It was the first and only time Bell captained his national side, but during that era especially, winning a cap, never mind captaining your country, was extremely hard to achieve and was much more of an honour than in the modern game. A few weeks prior, England had been knocked out of the Euro 1972 quarter-finals by West Germany. Whilst Bell effectively created the equaliser for England, his devastating shot only being palmed as far as non-rushing Francis Lee, England would lose the game due to a rare mistake from Bobby Moore, giving away a needless penalty in the dying embers of the game. The 1972-73 season was another disappointing one for City, but Bell was enjoying some of the happiest moments off the pitch at this time. He was a newly married man, and his restaurant business was booming. Bell's wedding reception was actually hosted at the Bell Waldron, and that wouldn't be the last time Bell was involved in a particularly merry and rowdy evening.
There was one time we went out after work and we went to this place. It was like a house, and they sold booze. He invited me and I went down. And all the players were there, and Malcolm Allison and that. And we sat in this room and they had this drink in front of me. It wasn't an alcoholic drink I had in front of me. And somebody shouted, "It's a raid." And everybody threw the drinks on the floor, and I'm sat there like, what's going on, what's happening here? And then these policemen came in, and I'm sat there with his drink. Nobody else had a drink in front of him, only me. And this policeman came and asked me my name and address, which I told him. And then they went, and somebody said to me, "You didn't give me your proper name and address, did you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "No, you shouldn't have done that." And I said, "But I was too scared not to." I was just glad that nobody got in trouble because of it.
City started the season well. Whilst they wouldn't have ordinarily qualified for the Charity Shield, they were invited to play the match and ended up winning the trophy. City won yet another derby game, 3-0 this time, Bell scoring twice and being denied a hat-trick by his third goal going down as an own goal by Martin Buchan.
By Stepney and a goal by Bell. And that's dangerous. Bell in! From the narrowest of angles.
Bell scored against United frequently in his career, 8 times in total. But for Buchan, it would have been 9. But for Buchan, Bell's legacy may have been even greater than it is, but that incident between Buchan and Bell wouldn't be for another 3 years. The season ended with City in 11th place, and even Bell underperformed for his high standards, only scoring 7 goals in the league, the first time he'd recorded single-digit goals for City in a full playing season. City even lost at home to Joe Mercer's Coventry City, and Allison left the club. It was a time of great change for City behind the scenes, and the background politics were detrimental to the on-pitch performances. Bell also couldn't escape managerial change and uncertainty at international level. The qualifiers for the 1974 World Cup would provide Bell another chance to compete in football's greatest competition. England had won the 1966 tournament, were unfortunate to be knocked out in the quarter-finals in 1970, and Alf Ramsey, England's World Cup winning manager, described the 1974 squad as better than his 1966 squad. England had Wales and Poland in their group, and only the top team would qualify. England started the campaign off strongly, beating Wales 1-0, with Bell scoring the only goal. England drew the next game against Wales and suffered a shock 2-0 defeat to Poland following an error from Bobby Moore. Before the final crucial game against Poland, which would decide whether England would qualify for the World Cup, Bell's world came crashing down. Marie, who was 5 months pregnant, sadly lost the baby. Bell's father passed away in July 1973, and Colin struggled to deal with both his emotions and intrusion from the media and press. Bell's private life was private, and he hated the unwanted spotlight, particularly as the headlines revolved around the loss of his unborn child and the death of his father. There would be no respite on the pitch either. England needed a win against Poland to top the group. The game ended 1-1, with Poland's goal coming from a defensive mistake by Norman Hunter, followed by uncharacteristic goalkeeping from Peter Shilton. Described by Bell as the most one-sided international he played in, the match was simply one of those games where England dominated the play, the chances, the shots, everything but the scoreline, thanks to a heroic display from the Polish keeper and luck just not being on England's side that night. Bell's World Cup dreams were in tatters. He was mainly used as a sub in 1970 and had now become one of England's most important players. He would have been in his peak years in the 74 World Cup. It was the chance to prove himself on the international stage. Bell described the failure to qualify as the biggest disappointment of his career. There would be another chance of international glory for Bell at Euro 76 and the 78 World Cup, but missing out on 74 rounded off a truly miserable summer for Bell. City's managerial woes were compounded when the club appointed former Norwich City boss Ron Saunders. To be blunt, he just wasn't cut out for City. He created disharmony in the dressing room by making a number of unpopular decisions, including sacking City's chief scout, and seemed to be doing his utmost to destroy the brilliant ethos at City. City was a family club, but Saunders was running City as his own little dictatorship. Question Ron, and you were out. Consequently, City suffered in the league and they were inconsistent. City finished 14th in the 73-74 season, but they at least infamously relegated United through a Dennis Law backheel goal.
Lee. Pulled across for Law! Dennis has done it!
City also managed to reach the League Cup final against Wolves, but Saunders' influence cast a depressing shadow over the players. The lead up to cup finals under Mercer and Allison had been jovial, fun, one of camaraderie. None of that was permitted under Saunders, and Bell found that, for the first time, he wasn't happy as a City player. Nevertheless, City dominated the final. They were much the better side, and somehow found themselves losing 1-0. Bell scored the equaliser, and the siege continued.
Rodney Marsh. And he's he's got it in well. Oh, and this is a chance for Bell, and he's taken it, and that is 1-1. Scobby again taking it. Booth is right in there once more. Bell is in there too. Oh, and again Pearce has done it.
In the final few minutes, Bell took a shot from outside the box, which hit the underside of the crossbar and bounced out, just like the infamous goal in the 1966 World Cup final. But this one didn't count as a goal. As against Poland, luck wasn't on Bell's side. City's domination of the game wasn't rewarded, and Wolves scored a late winner. Bell had lost his first cup final, and Saunders would be sacked at the end of the season after the players made it clear they didn't want him as manager. The managerial issues for a successive season once again impacted Bell's scoring form. As with last season, Bell managed to score 7 league goals. Not a poor amount for an ordinary midfielder, but a disappointing number for Bell's high standards. Bell obviously didn't compete in the 1974 World Cup, but he did take part in another summer competition instead, the TV programme Superstars. Superstars was a sports programme which assembled athletes from various sports and saw them compete against one another in events not related to the sports they were professional in. The idea was the most well-rounded athlete, who was the best at a number of events, would be declared the overall superstar. Footballers, boxers, F1 drivers, golfers, Olympic medalists, basically every type of athlete you could think of took part. Kevin Keegan famously fell off his bike in the 1976 edition, a reminder as to why a programme like this would never work with modern-day top-flight footballers, with the risk of injury being something clubs wouldn't accept. Ever the athlete and competitor, Bell agreed to take part.
Soccer. One of the world's greatest midfield players, Colin Bell.
I'm a little bit worried about the competition because I've dropped out of the swimming, but one of the events is rowing, and the reason I dropped out of the swimming is I can't swim, so I'm a bit concerned about the rowing.
It was a bit of fun for Bell, so he didn't bother training for the events, but his competition certainly did.
We had this enormous lineup of talent. We thought, will they take it seriously? Take it seriously. You'd think they were all in a World Cup final.
Bell performed very impressively.
Break it to win. And that's the winner. All 5 kills and 6 shots to spare. So Colin Bell is accurate with hand and eye as he is with his footballing feet. Yachtsman and cricketer share the points for 2nd and 3rd. And with that, Bell is right on John Conte's heels.
He won in the pistol shooting and even beat a gold medal Olympian runner in the hurdles.
John Conte going well. Colin Bell going even better. The Iron Man from Manchester City. The man who can run 9 or 10 miles of cross-country running. His condition training beginning to show. Colin Bell away and clear. There's Colin. He's going to take it by about 20 yards. John Conte holding on to 2nd. Mike Shannon on to 3rd. David Henry can't catch these 3. And that's a splendid run from Colin Bell, soccer's Iron Man, the recognised athlete anywhere on a soccer field.
Bell ended the competition with a bronze, the only footballer in Superstars history to finish on the podium. City surprisingly sold star striker Francis Lee to Derby County ahead of the 1974-75 season. Tony Buck, City's former captain, was now manager of the club, and City were top of the table in November.
Bell!
That lead wouldn't last past Christmas, however, and a Francis Lee winner at City would spell the end of City's title hopes.
Interesting. Very interesting. Oh! Look at his face! Just look at his face!
Francis Lee's Derby won the league that season, and Bell's view was that had Lee not been sold, City would have won the title that year. Glyn Pardoe and Mike Summerby also moved on during the season, leaving Bell as the last remaining member of City's Holy Trinity. City improved on last season, playing some fantastic football and finishing in 8th place. Bell scored a remarkable 15 league goals, the most he'd managed in a single campaign, and he'd become a father in July 1975, where he'd given birth to a baby girl, Dawn. Going into the 1975-76 season, Bell was playing the best football of his career. At 29 years old, he was in his peak, and he was included in the 1975 PFA Team of the Season.
Gone, and it's Colin. What a goal! What a fantastic shot by Colin Bell!
His Herculean athleticism hadn't faded in the slightest, but he now had years of experience and understood the game more precisely than ever. There was another 5 or 6 years waiting for Bell at the highest level. He was City's best player and one of the most important members of the England team. Bell also had a great chance of winning the league title that year. Whilst the likes of Lee, Summerby and Young had left the club, City has strengthened the team with the signings of Asa Hartford, Dennis Chewett, and perhaps most important of all, England international and centre-half Dave Watson. It was a very strong City side, comparable to their title-winning team. Bell had every reason to be optimistic. He was coming off a season where he'd scored 15 league goals. He was in his peak. He'd almost reached a half-century of caps for England with 48 caps. The future was bright. But United's Martin Buchan put an end to all of that. On Wednesday, the 12th of November 1975, in a League Cup tie against United, which City would win 4-0, Bell suffered a career-ending injury.
I was at Main Road when poor old Colin got clobbered by Martin Buchan of United. It's been long documented, but it virtually finished his career.
Martin Buchan's reckless challenge on Bell caused Bell's knee to bend backwards. The blood vessels in his thigh and calf burst. His ligaments were torn. The muscle was damaged beyond repair, and the cartilages had been destroyed. Bell's knee was just a bag of blood.
I mean, I remember the game he played, and it was awful. I mean, I was just coming back from injury and I was sub. So when Colin got injured, I come on the pitch and his leg was 2-3 times the size of what it should have been. And that obviously it was. Anyway, they got him in the dressing room, and apparently whoever it was, the doctor or they had a surgeon there or something like that, he just said, anyone got a sharp object? And apparently if he hadn't have done this, what he did, he stabbed it into his leg and blood went everywhere. He reckon if he hadn't have done that and released the pressure, he would have lost his leg. That was incredible. And then obviously they rushed him to hospital.
Martin Buchan never apologised for it. He never went to visit him in hospital or anything, which was a bit sad because Martin Buchan, I always thought, was a reasonable player even though he was a Red.
At hospital, the doctors informed Bell that the trauma he'd suffered was akin to that of someone who'd been involved in a serious car crash. Bell nearly lost his leg and almost his life as there was a serious risk of thrombosis, otherwise known as blood clotting of the veins. Bell never blamed Buchan for the injury, but Buchan, disgustingly, never visited Bell in hospital or apologised for the challenge. He was later quoted as saying, "I've never had any problem sleeping at night over that tackle. The referee never even stopped the game, so the tackle couldn't have been that bad." If you're somehow watching this documentary, Martin, it was a bad tackle. A horrendous tackle. Bell was out of the side from November until April 1976. He would be just a spectator as City defeated Newcastle in the League Cup final, with Dennis Tueart scoring one of the greatest League Cup final goals in history.
Floated in towards Tommy Booth. Oh, and what a goal by Tueart! What a goal! The Duke of York. Peter Swale smiling there, the Manchester City chairman. And Manchester City have won it.
And what it's done in time is seize the knee up.
It's become what, like a hinge on it?
It's become like a rusty joint, really. I mean, it's basically need a lot of exercises over the time of being out, just to keep it going.
Bell was determined to make a comeback for City. After making a few appearances in the reserve side, Bell made his long-awaited return from injury on the 10th of April 1976. The reception for King Colin that day was nothing short of extraordinary. Main Road was absolutely packed that day as over 42,000 fans welcomed Bell onto the pitch. But the adulation wouldn't last. Bell was able to play the full 90 minutes of the game, but he clearly wasn't right.
And when he came back, I mean, he could never get the full he could only bend it so far, so that limited him. But he still got in the team and still played well enough, but it wasn't the same Colin.
In the next game, Bell felt his knee pop when he went in for a challenge. He'd probably come back from injury too soon, but the damage he'd sustained was so bad, it most likely didn't matter how long he recovered for. The flexibility in his knee was damaged beyond repair. That being said, Bell was still optimistic of making a recovery, and the England manager at the time, Don Revie, contacted Bell to assure him that he was going to be an essential element of the 1978 World Cup squad.
The thing that keeps me going is the more exercise it gets, the closer I am to playing. I mean, say I get a lot of pain, I think, well, I get a lot of pain now. When I've done exercises for possibly an hour or 2 hours, it'll get less and less, and the knee will get better and better. Get close to playing. I keep flogging myself to death, hoping that one minute it'll just release, and that'll be it.
City finished 8th the season Bell was injured. After a number of turbulent seasons created by poor management, City were as strong as ever. The following season, without their best player, City finished second, just 1 point behind Liverpool. Bell missed the entire campaign through injury. It's almost a certainty that had Bell been available, City would have won the 1976-77 league title. Bell made another return to the first team partway through the 1977-78 season. It had been more than 2 years since the initial injury, and Bell was introduced as a half-time sub in a Boxing Day match against Newcastle. As soon as Bell appeared through the tunnel, the crowd went mad with noise as they all rose to their feet, more noise than Bell had ever heard in his life. It went on for around 4 minutes, non-stop applause and noise for the king of the Kippax. It was an emotional day as grown men cried and supporters broke down in tears, ecstatic that their hero had returned. It was truly inspirational.
So obviously you said that you weren't really that into football when you first met Colin Bell.
No.
But look at you now, you're wearing a City kit and a City scarf.
I know, yeah.
So what changed?
Colin Bell, because he was such a nice person. We went to a match, I think it was Newcastle we played. And Colin Bell had been off injured for quite a long time. And he came on at half-time. And I cried. Tears, the crowd went absolutely mad when he came onto the pitch, and it really got to me because of all that adulation for that one person. It was absolutely fantastic, and it really got to me, and that's what really, another thing that really got me into football.
So Colin Bell's the reason why you're a City fan then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lifted by the crowd, City went from 0-0 to 4-0 up. The support Bell received was described by him as the highlight of his career. Tommy Booth, who also played that day, noted in an interview that he'd played in cup finals in front of crowds larger than 100,000, but he'd never heard anything like the roar at Main Road that day. Bell was able to stay in the side as City won 7 games in a row, but he was still limping every game and was nowhere near the player he once was.
I was also at the match on Boxing Day when Colin came back to make his recovery after 2 years of a long slog after his injury. And Tony Buck put him on after half-time. And if my memory serves me right, I think he played him nearly like on the right wing, right full-back, which is obviously not Colin's position, but just to sort of ease him in. But it was obvious he was struggling. He still had a bit of a limp and couldn't do the things he used to do.
Bell played another few games with the reserves to increase his fitness and even managed to help them win the Central League, the first time the reserves had won their league. Bell didn't feature in the league again that season as City finished in a more than respectable 4th place. Again, there was no doubt at the time that had a peak Bell been fit for all of that season, City would have properly challenged Forest for the title. England also suffered in Bell's absence. Bell had been an integral cog for England in qualifying for Euro 1976, scoring 2 goals in a win over Czechoslovakia, but his injury meant he missed the final group game against Portugal, which England had to win to qualify. England drew the game 1-1. England also failed to qualify for the 1978 World Cup. They went out on goal difference, with Italy scoring 3 more goals. Again, whilst it's not possible to predict with certainty what would have happened if Bell was available for England, let's just say England would have much preferred to have a peak Colin Bell in their team than not. The 1978-79 season would be Bell's final campaign at City. He and Marie had another child, this time a son, John, and Colin managed 10 appearances in the league, one of those matches resulting in a man-of-the-match display where Bell was deployed as the sweeper, but as the performances went on, Bell knew that his time was nearly up. He was just nowhere near as mobile as he once was. His body could no longer do what he used to be able to do. He was 32 years old, he still had so much to give, and was heartbroken and frustrated at the idea of having to pack his career in far too soon. One thing for sure was Bell would never play for another English side. City was his home. By this stage, City had reappointed Malcolm Allison, the man who brought Bell to City and Bell's mentor. Colin knew the writing was on the wall. In his heart of hearts, whilst he wanted to stay positive and keep trying, he was well aware he'd never be back to his best, and that he was no longer good enough to play for City. Allison took Bell to one side and confirmed to Bell what he already knew. It was time to move on. Bell didn't argue, he knew Allison was right. Telling Colin Bell he was finished was the hardest thing Allison ever did in his entire career. You played on after the injury and we could all see that you were never going to get fully fit again. It quickly became apparent that it was wrong for you to carry on. Watching you play made me fall in love with the game more and more. It broke my heart to have to tell you that it was time to finish, but there could be no other ending.
Colin Bell, probably the best player I ever worked with.
Really?
Yeah, the best player I ever worked with. He was so gifted, he was so much talent. He could score goals from midfield. He had great pace. He was good in the air. He had everything.
On the 21st of August 1979, Bell said his goodbyes at Main Road. A wonderful 13-year career with Manchester City was now over. Bell was the greatest player of City's first golden era. He won everything there was to win in England. 2 Charity Shields, 2 League Cups, an FA Cup and the league title. He also won the 2nd Division title with City and City's first and currently only European trophy, the European Cup Winners' Cup. He made 501 appearances for City, the 5th most of any player. He started 498 of those. He scored 153 goals for City, the 4th most of any player. There's unfortunately no complete record of how many goals Bell created, but he was one of the best at getting assists. In total, he made 592 professional football appearances and scored 178 goals. He scored 8 times in 21 Manchester derbies, the 4th best of any player, and only 1 behind Bobby Charlton. At international level, Bell made 48 appearances for England, scoring 9 times. And almost all of this was achieved before his career-ending injury at the age of 29. Following the injury, Bell only made 42 appearances and scored 3 goals for City. He never played for England again. Bell's career was of course excellent, but had he not suffered the injury, it could have been so much more.
If he hadn't have got that injury, God knows what he could have achieved. Most of the lads would say it as well, who played with him. He'd have beat every record because he was that good. I mean, he'd have gone on. If he had, apart from, like you say, injury, he'd gone on. God knows how long he could have played for. But he would have broke all records, I'm sure of it. It's just a tragedy, yeah.
Bell was adamant that he would have had another 5 or 6 years at the highest level. Tony Buck had performed at a higher level until he was 40, and Bell was much fitter than him. Bell was also convinced he would have eclipsed 100 caps for England but for the injury. He'd also easily be City's most capped player and perhaps top goalscorer. City would no doubt have won at least 1 more league title too.
If Colin had been there, I mean, you can say if he'd have been there, if he hadn't been, but if he had been there, we would have won more than what we did. And I was coming back from injury. I had 2 discs removed, and I ended up playing on the right in midfield, and he played in Colin's place. And I say this, but it's only a joke. I say and people say they couldn't tell the difference between me and Col, only that Colin had grey hair and I had black. So if you believe that, you believe everything.
City lost the title by 1 point in 1977 when Bell made no appearances for the club and came 4th in 1978 with limited appearances. Those heights would never be reached again until the 2010s, and the club was relegated 4 years after Bell left the club. Bell is obviously a City legend, but for whatever reason, he isn't talked about in the same breath as other football legends, or isn't nearly as well known by non-City fans. And I suspect the reason for that is because his peak years were cut short due to the injury.
You know, what they say about him is Colin's career was ended early, but they don't say what he'd achieved in that. You know, because he was playing for England, he was winning trophies at City, and he was a top player. You only learn and get better in this game. You never stop learning in football, and he was at the top end of his career, and he could have gone on and on and on. And like I say, he'd have broke a lot of records. He would have done. It was just a tragedy, the injury.
City's Holy Trinity, for example, is nowhere near as famous as United's. Perhaps that's solely because United's team were able to win the European Cup, because when the 2 teams came up against each other in Bell's era, City were the better team. Of the 6 to 8 years in which United had their Holy Trinity, Bell City won most of those games. He only lost 5 of the 21 Manchester derbies he competed in. Bobby Charlton himself described Bell as one of his great heroes and a great player. He also went on to say Bell was undersold as a footballer at national level, most likely because he burst onto the international scene following England's World Cup win. Comparing players from different eras is almost impossible, but it's important to try and illustrate just how good Bell was. His most renowned attribute was his athleticism, pace, fitness and strength, but he was more than just a box-to-box runner. He had an exceptional football brain. He would try to run players into the ground, moving them around to tire them out. He constantly made runs to create space for his teammates to exploit, dragging opposition players out of position. His football philosophy was to score more goals than the opposition, attacking the pitch end to end. He didn't know any other way to play. He would quite comfortably start in the current City side.
Fantastic player, always listened to people. The fitness he had and all, it was just a natural fitness he had. He said, but his passing, It's his heading ability, and from pitch to pitch, ideal was his up and down. Great midfield player.
He didn't have the dribbling skill that David Silva has. He scored more goals than David Silva did. He had the brain of David Silva, and David Silva's brain is second to none in many ways.
He always seemed to get in the right place, the right time to score goals, and he was a very good team player. Didn't just play for himself.
I mean, if he was tackled, he never retaliated or anything like that. He just got up and got on with it, there's a few other players that are always like that, like Jimmy Greaves and some of my other favourite players.
Someone as Kevin De Bruyne, he's a good player, De Bruyne. Colin was a good player. Well, they're great players, and you can compare them, but I would never ever say who's the best, because in that day and the time that they played, they were at the top level. They were always doing it, and they did it every week in, week out. It was awful, because sky was the limit because of what he could have achieved, because he was unique as a player. He had everything.
Some have been noted that Bell never knew how good he actually was, and like Booth, compared Bell to De Bruyne, given their similar attributes and talents. Such a comparison is apt, since both should be considered as complete midfielders and world-class players. It's not a coincidence that Kevin De Bruyne shares a nickname with Colin Bell, King Kevin. His passing was world-class too, but what set Bell apart was his goal-scoring prowess from midfield. Again, this isn't a perfect comparison, but by the age of 29, the great English midfielders of England's golden generation, Scholes, Gerrard, Lampard, had scored 70, 71 and 85 top-flight goals respectively. Perhaps Lampard's tally of 85 top-flight goals by the age of 29 is the fairest comparison, considering Lampard is regarded as one of the greatest goal-scoring midfielders of all time. Bell, by the age of 29, had scored 103 top-flight goals. That is how good Bell was. And figures like that are why Bell needs to be included in any conversation on the best players to play the game, despite injury robbing him of his peak years.
I was very disappointed. He only got 48 caps. He captained England once, which is a great honour that's bestowed on him. I mean, he's a legend already in his career, but he would have gone on to some great things. He really got 100 caps. He was that good a player. There was certain England games where he didn't come over as good as sometimes he did play for City, but then most England players, are saddled with that thing. But his reputation speaks for itself. He would have gone on to be one of the best ever, without a doubt.
After leaving City, Bell spent a very short time playing for the San Jose Earthquakes, where he would live with and play alongside George Best. It was a short spell as Bell made 5 appearances before deciding to retire from football for good. He had no interest in being a manager, nor did he want to play in the lower divisions of England or become a star TV pundit. Bell carried out some coaching of football camps across the country, but his focus was on his family and restaurant business. By 1989, the Bell Waldron had ran its course, and it was time to sell. When watching his children at school sporting events, he always tried to blend in as much as possible. He didn't like to make a fuss or draw any attention to himself, and perhaps that's another reason why Bell isn't known as well as he should be. He actively avoided fame. Bell returned to City as a youth coach and scout hybrid in 1989. He didn't have an official title, but after over a decade away from football, he was back with City, his second family. The biggest what-if for Bell's scouting career was when he attended an England under-15s match. He asked who England's number 10 was, since he was so impressed by his performance. It was none other than Michael Owen. Bell tried to convince City for a year to try and sign him from Liverpool, but ultimately it came to nothing. Bell was also heavily involved in the scouting of Gio Kinclasi, a name which should be very familiar to City fans. Gio was going to be a cult hero, winning 2 Man City Player of the Year awards back-to-back from 1996 to 97. By 1997, Bell had become deeply unhappy at Manchester City. Francis Lee was the new chairman, but his running of the club was a disaster. The family club ethos that he had founded was no more. Bell had constant run-ins with one of the youth coaches, Neil McNabb, who lacked any form of nous or tact when it came to speaking with the youth players. He was overly aggressive and acted like he was speaking to senior professionals, not teenagers and children. It was therefore unsurprising that the late 90s were tumultuous for City, ending with them being relegated to the 3rd tier for the first time in 1998. In May 1997, Bell was told by the latest manager that he was being sacked. No explanation was given, no complaints or concerns had been raised to Bell, and the meeting was carried out in a very cold and clinical manner. This wasn't Bell's City. The sacking made no sense. City's youth team was doing brilliantly well, finishing top, joint top and third in the previous 3 seasons. A week before the sacking, fans at the Prestwich and Whitefield supporters group presented Bell with a cheque to be spent on youth development. They told Bell how pleased they were with the progress he'd achieved. Letters of support from the fans were sent to Bell, but he felt humiliated at what had happened. His reputation had been unfairly damaged, and Bell had to clear his name. He took City to court for unfair dismissal, in part to inform the fans, in an unbiased forum, what had really happened. The case was settled out of court, and Bell felt vindicated. Francis Lee defended the decision to sack Bell at an AGM later that year. The shareholders at the AGM cheered when Bell's dismissal was labelled a disgrace by one of the attendees. Bell never revealed the full details of what happened in that horrid final year at City with Lee as chairman, but he never spoke to Lee again. After Lee resigned as chairman, City's new board asked Bell if he'd return in some capacity to Main Road, working in the corporate suites on a match day, just introducing himself, chatting to the supporters about football and making them feel at home. Even after all those years working at the Bell Waldron as host, Bell still found it difficult to walk up and talk to strangers, but he was a lovely, kind and humble person who didn't allow his shyness to come before the supporters.
Once I got interested in football, went to Main Road, and where they used to park the cars by the side of the ground, he got out of his car and he came towards us, and I went up to him and said, "Hello, Colin, do you remember me?" He said, "Yes, I do. You used to work for me, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "That was a long time ago." I said, "Yes, it was, and I'm surprised that you remember me." And he did remember me, and I thought that was really nice. There was another time, oh yes, I remember now, they had this competition at the Etihad, and you had to tell them something that reminded you of Main Road. And so I mentioned that I used to work for Colin Bell on this. It was like a thing you had to fill in. And I won it. We went into this, I can't remember where it was. It must have been in one of the bars that they had. And we had a meal and everything. And we had this special seat to watch the match. And while I was there, because I mentioned in my application that Colin Bell actually came across and to see me. And he actually came into this restaurant and shook hands with me. And I think I had my photograph taken with him, and I can't remember what happened to it.
So did he remember you?
Yes, he remembered me, yeah. I thought it was lovely that. He was in another part of the ground and he came all the way across just to meet me. And he came across and I thought it was really nice of him. That was quite recent, that. It was only a few years ago, that.
In May 1999, Bell was invited to attend the Football League Evening of Legends and was included in the top 100 players of the 20th century. He was a guest of honour in City's final game at Main Road in 2003 and stayed behind after the match for around an hour, dismissing his security guards and instead signing autographs and speaking to fans.
This is part of my enormous collection of autographs, which I started when I was 9-year-old. But just to show you a few ones, and particularly of Colin, there's one of here, Colin playing in the cup final in 1968, where I was behind the goal when Neil Young got the winner. A few others, there's Colin in his typical pose. To the left is Tommy Booth scoring the winner at Villa Park in the semi-final to take us to the final. Another one of Colin next to Rodney Marsh. And again, another pose, keeping his eye on the ball. And there he is again in the more modern ones, the best wishes, Colin Bell. I've actually got a photograph of Colin playing for England against Scotland. And there he is with Billy Bremner in the background. Fantastic man, great man. Always had time to sort of sign an autograph.
And that was the sort of man Colin Bell was. Incredibly down-to-earth, shy, humble, not one for the limelight. There's a reason why I would struggle to find interviews with Colin Bell, because he did so few.
I must say he was a perfect gentleman. What a nice person, very unassuming. You know, he wasn't, oh, I'm Colin Bell and all this. He was very, just normal really. Very well-mannered, very quiet, lovely person.
Bell's love for City never ended, and he regularly attended invitations from numerous supporter branches, always amazed at the reception he'd receive.
In 2004, Bell's legacy was solidified. He was inducted into the Manchester City Hall of Fame, and Manchester City fans were invited to vote on who they wanted to name the West Stand after. By an overwhelming majority, the fans decided to name it the Colin Bell Stand, which to this day remains the only named stand at the City of Manchester Stadium.
The following year, Bell was inducted into the England Hall of Fame and received an MBE from the Queen for his charity and community work. Bell would continue his ambassadorial role for City at the Etihad. In around 2005, Bell was diagnosed with bowel cancer, the disease which had claimed the life of his mother. On the 5th of January 2021, at the age of 74, Colin Bell passed away after a short illness. In a career shortened by injury, Bell achieved more than most, thanks to his supportive family when he was a boy and his own tireless effort. Bell lived a wonderful life both on the pitch and off it. He never actively sought fame, but his time as a player demanded adulation.
We've had many great players, but Colin Bell, Bert Troutman and latterly David Silva and a few others are in that category. And sadly he's no longer with us, and at such an early age, which is very sad for someone who was a fit and a very athletic person.
He was always sort of one of my favourite players when he'd gone to City.
He'd talk to anybody, and he was such a nice person. Very shy, very quiet and very nice. I was quite impressed with him.
I will say this, he liked to drink as well, but he didn't like people knowing he did. But he did. He'd have the odd glass of wine. He wouldn't binge on it and out like that, but he'd have the odd drink. Colin was a great lad, funny lad. Pleasure to play with the kid. He was brilliant and lovely fella. I went to his funeral as well, yeah, and that was, good lad, smashing lad.
And that was Colin Bell, brilliant player, brilliant person.
He was humble and shy with a legendary aura. Despite his greatness, there was no arrogance, only authenticity and genuineness. When he scored, he made a quick celebration and got on with the game. No showboating, just doing what he was paid to do. He was a superstar on the pitch and a shy, quiet man off it. Few players have left such an indelible mark on City, the club announced. He was irreplaceable. He was a once-in-a-generation talent, says former City and England keeper Joe Corrigan. The passage of time does little to erase the memories of his genius, says City chairman Khaldoon Al-Mubarak. He is to Manchester City what George Best is to Manchester United. He is a Manchester City, England and footballing legend. The king is dead. Rest in peace, Colin Bell.